Welcome to our session. It's called the Engineers and Integrators Role in Cyber Harmony. So before we get started, because we've got a pretty huge audience, how many integrators do we have out there? By show of hands. How many integrators? So we've got a few integrators. How many consulting engineers? Do we have any engineers in the audience? We've got one consulting engineer. How about end users? How about distributors? Manufacturers? Okay, so we've got a plethora in here today. Not as many as I would have thought, but we've got a good group. So, cyber harmony, by show of hands. How many have heard the term cyber harmony? Okay, we've got a couple here. So what is cyber harmony? It's a term that's been picking up traction over the last 6 or 8 months. And it's really basically a concept, right? It's a concept that's pretty self-explanatory. It's the idea of all of the stakeholders who are involved in a project being on the same page when it comes to cyber awareness, right? When it comes to cyber awareness, not only cyber awareness, but best practices, owner's project requirements, because the owner is the main stakeholder, right? Specifications, IT, OT, coordination, drawings, and cyber being embedded into hardware and software solutions. So when you look at this graphic, this is what we think about when we think about cyber harmony and we think about all the stakeholders. So today we're going to basically talk about the owners, or not the owners, but the engineer and the integrator's role in cyber harmony. And we also have a couple, or at least one end user here. My group today, Brian Oswald, Paul Maxima, Mike Mitchell, and Russ Holton. Each one of you guys, do me a quick favor, introduce yourselves, starting with Mike, and just give me a brief snapshot of what you think cyber harmony is.
Okay, easy. So Mike Mitchell, I'm with Cochrane Supply, I'm the CTO. I've been there for 22 years, 23 years, something like that. So I came out of the IT industry and into this role. So cyber harmony to me is more of the collection of all the people involved in getting a building going and getting the construction off the ground, from the conception of the building to the handover to past that. It's all those entities involved in that working together and getting on the same page in terms of what it takes to make the building secure and that system secure.
Thanks, Mike. Russ?
Russ Holton, Bedrock, Detroit. I've been with Bedrock going on 8 years. Prior to Bedrock, I did 25 years in the industry as a control contractor, working for the company I'm actually at right now. We did a lot of work for those guys back in the day. Cyber harmony to me is, it's what Mike said. It's about getting all the groups together to come into like a common agreement on what we're doing. Your cybersecurity strategy, your smart building tech, your mechanical systems. To me, it's marrying all those systems, all those groups, all those teams together, from the designers, the master system integrator, to the control contractors, to your mechanical contractors, right? If anything in that marriage of teams fails, the whole project will fail. So you have a lot of things to work on and coordinate with cyber harmony.
What about you, Paul?
Paul Maxima, Newcomb and Boyd. I am filling in for Mike MacMahon, weather kept him home. So I've been in Newcomb and Boyd 4 years. I've been in this industry over 40. I've seen everything. I didn't worry about cyber harmony when we did pneumatic controls, but now everything's become digital. It has impacted the thinking process on all the people that have to be involved. So we hear about design, but there's a lot of education to this as well. Understanding how we educate the general contractors, the controls contractors, the end users, everybody that has their hand in it, both during construction and after construction. So cyber harmony brings all the different ways that we understand how we can secure things, keep educating people on how we can manage systems and mitigate risk, because it's all about risk, right? Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. How about you, Brian?
Brian Oswald, I'm with CBRE. We focus more on the system integration side. I've been in the industry for 19 years. You know, for me, similar to Russ and Mike, cyber harmony is really that convergence of IT and facilities, something that we have talked about for a really long time, and I think we've made significant progress, especially when you look at the hardware that's available today, the processes that are in place today, and the general understanding of what IT security and deployment of that technology means within a facility. But as others have said, there's obviously more to be done, and this is a nice launching pad to continue that journey.
Thanks, Brian. So when we think about the stakeholders, it really starts with the owner, developing a really good owner's project requirement document that can be passed down to the consulting engineers so that they have a guide spec or a baseline as to what cyber precautions or what cyber practices need to be embedded in the consulting engineer's design documents. So Paul, let's talk about a project. Let's start from point A. So when you meet with an owner, because there's always a design development stage to any project. I don't care if you're designing a chilled water system. There's always a sit down with either the owner's IT group, the owner's facilities group. There's always a design development stage. So Paul, talk to me about some of the questions that you would ask an owner in regards to making sure that cyber is embedded into your design.
Right. So I think it's important to understand, first of all, cybersecurity is made up of layers of people and technology, right? It takes both of those things to help develop a program to be able to have a secure environment. So some of the questions I think like we look at is just like in a regular construction project, who are the people who are the stakeholders in this? Who are the people that are involved with making decisions on how things are going to get networked and secured? Who are the individuals that are going to manage these devices, the assets that are installed and the software that's installed long term? Is it going to be internally managed? Is it going to be externally? Do you have policies in place on how that's going to be done to manage the assets on your network? And then the other thing is, what type of standards do you have? Have you built standards? Do you have playbooks on how you deploy from start to finish and how you educate the folks on how to manage those systems? So I think that's a big part of the original engagement. And then once we get to that point, then it becomes more of like construction process and confirming that the things are done that were part of that playbook.
Right. So when you start getting to the questions about deployment, so Russ, let's just say that for you guys, most of your deployments are on your network, right? You guys moved from being on-prem, right? Being on-prem with all of your devices, all of your software, all your hardware, to moving off-prem and pretty much moving into a cloud solution, right? So talk to me about what that process was like, how you guys came to that decision, and what you asked the engineers to do as far as their design practices when deploying your built environment in the cloud. Okay.
Yeah. So for Bedrock, we had our own server, our own data center, right? So it was just down the road from our main portfolio in Detroit. So we had everything housed on our own servers. We were doing our own security, cybersecurity, our own firewalls, maintaining our servers, maintaining our fiber infrastructure out the city of Detroit. And our MSI came to us and said, hey, have you ever considered going to the cloud? Because even though this, we owned all of this, it was still costing us about $500,000 to $600,000 annually to run this data center and have these servers up, right? So we had problems with our own infrastructure. We had a breach in our security, so we had our servers taken down, which took our entire BMS infrastructure down for Detroit and Cleveland. So we had 62 properties we couldn't connect into for about 8 hours. So our internal teams had to scramble. And part of the problem with having internal teams is that staffing, right? Because it costs money to have people on staff, especially competent people that know what they're doing. So Bedrock we had to make a decision, and we did it wasn't something we did overnight. It was a 1.5-year project. So the first year of this project was me beating my head off the wall, trying to get my internal IT teams, our technology leadership, corporate leadership to buy into like going off-prem to go into the cloud. We had to do a lot of case studies. So we met with Azure, we met with AWS, we met with Google. So we went to all these different server providers to check on how their security was. And long story short, at the end of it, we realized with all the research we hired some third-party contractors to look into it for us. Their cloud was more secure than our own on-prem system, our own private servers that we were maintaining. We were very proud of our systems, beating our chest because, hey, we're doing this all on our own, we're secure. And then we had that breach. So that coordination wasn't something that happened overnight. Like I said, a year and a half, many teams involved. When we made the lift, the decision was made, we decided to go with Google. Their security just seemed to add 3 or 4 more layers onto our system. So we made that shift, and our MSI did it in about 8 hours. So we've got 15 million square feet of integrated properties, right? So we're talking thousands of data points, hundreds of thousands of trends. We were able to move everything that we had stored on our servers up into the cloud in about an 8-hour lift and shift. Very small outage, maybe an hour at best. And that's been online now for 2.5 years. We haven't had one security breach, one outage in our networks, and it's running flawlessly. So it's a big investment. You have to put so many man hours in. So many teams have to be involved in it. And the biggest hurdle in this project for me was leadership buying in. They just were afraid to go to a cloud. And I don't know why. Clouds have been around for years, right? Everything in your phone goes to the cloud and secure, right? So for us, that was where we stood with it.
So for you guys, it started with a breach, right?
Yes.
So Brian, you guys are MSIs, and one of the things that I've learned from talking with you guys and seeing some of the things that you guys deployed, how do you handle data encryption? Because I know that data encryption is one of the, I would call it one of the pillars of making sure that your system is secure, right? Whether it's MacMahon at C, or whether it's at the device level, whether it's at the supervisor level. How do you guys handle data encryption?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the technology has really evolved over the last couple of years, and we are seeing more data encryption at the device to the gateway level to the supervisor level, and managing that is sometimes user dependent, and the requirements that end user might have within their own IT framework. But for us, it's really by following best practices and standards that we deploy. So whether that's following ISO 27001, utilizing those more advanced devices that allow that encryption to occur at those different layers, single sign-on, things like that. It's all part of what you have to deploy in modern intelligent buildings. Without that, you're just missing a big component of it.
And so what measures do you guys put in place for unauthorized users to access the OT network or the OT system or the DAS system?
Again, some of that's client specific. But firewalls, VPNs, there's different configurations. We manage the user access levels for the client, or we at least put in the policies and procedures that the client can then manage those access levels. But there's at least a foundational component that we're allowed to that we can build off of. It's not limited to just turn the system over and then the client can do whatever they want to add or remove users. It's more refined than that. But what we've seen, at least from the integrator level, when non-cloud deployments, it really depends on what the client's requirements look like.
Right. And those are some of the conversations that you have up front. Correct. Being an MSI opposed to going traditional plan spec and the engineer is involved. But if an engineer is involved, then you have those talks or those meetings in coordination with the engineer and the owner?
Correct, absolutely. Okay. It goes exactly back to what Paul was saying.
How about disaster recovery?
It's got to be built into your entire process. So we implement a disaster recovery plan. More and more products are coming with cloud recovery applications. Some are more mature than others. But as a business, you have to have your own disaster recovery plan. Not only do we have a business recovery plan, but we have a disaster recovery plan for all of the deployments that we have for our clients. For us, it can be as simple as maintaining database backups. It can be as, the revision of the database that was recently deployed. We have process or policies in place for when changes are made to a station or a program and how it's stored on our servers so that it can be backed up to the client's network if required. So it's all, again, not to beat a dead horse, but it's all part of being a system integrator in today's space. It's your level of engagement goes beyond how to write the sequence of operation. It's It's more the specific IT practices that the businesses have been doing for years.
And would that include regular security audits that you pass on to the end user?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so we offer that as an independent offering. Many organizations have their own. But you know, for instance, if you do work for a financial institution, you will be independently audited of your policies and your procedures by those organizations to ensure alignment of not only regulatory requirements, but just best practices. So for us, that's you know, we follow those and we can provide that service, or we can work with a provider of those services to ensure that when conducting an audit, not only are the items found that are in violation, but they're remediated and done so in a timely manner, so that not to delay the project due to you know, trying to sell people on why this should be cloud, why it should be OT network.
Right.
It's constantly moving the ball forward.
Right. So, and we all understand that there's, Mike, look like you had
Yes,
something to
I was going to tag ahead of that if I could.
Please, please.
Too, and along with those practices in disaster recovery, one of the important things that Brian does and others is testing those practices as well. You know, making sure you have a team that's dedicated to that. You do regular testing of those backups. Make sure that there's a process to follow in the recovery, and kind of go through different scenarios. Okay, what happens if this fails? What happens if this portion of it fails? And that works with the supervisor that gets done it. So, yeah, just tagging on.
Yes, I want to tag on to what he just said. So after we had our breach, we hired so Rock Mortgage is our founding father's main company. Bedrock's an off-spin of that. So we have very high security standards in our networks because of, you know, security, the SEC regulations, right? So after we had our breach, it was, you know, it hit way up on leadership. It was you know, obviously it's a problem. So we hired a third-party contractor to come in and audit our systems and test. And what we found was that they were able to dial into our servers, get down into Jace level, and into Shinola Hotel, which is one of our large hotels in downtown Detroit. We got the breach and shut it down, but through that third-party audit, we thought we were like locked down and secure because we have managed switches and all of these things that you do on your network, and they still got down to Jace level, right? So that was a big problem. Since we've been on the cloud off-prem, we do these same audits, and we haven't had a breach on the cloud yet. So our security has improved immensely by what we've done here.
Well, Mike, you bring my mind when you brought up testing, right?
Yes.
So we know that there's no formal commissioning process for cyber that's industry accepted or industry-wide accepted, right? So if there's no formal commissioning process in place for you, Paul, what do you guys do to ensure that testing is being done during installation or post-installation? Maybe functional testing, pre-functional testing,
Right.
testing, yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned that. We have been developing a OT commissioning plan that has a cyber component of that. We have a pretty strong commissioning team, and we had to educate them, right? I think the first step is the education, right? Before the engagement, understand what the issues are. I wanted to add on to what they were saying earlier is we see a lot of deployments of new software and new equipment, but there's still a ton of legacy stuff on there. So you have all these different mixed components of various security levels, some that have none at all, some that have security where you can use token management or TLS encryption on the data that has some form of encryption on there. And then you have some devices that are not even connected that way, they're connected through an API to the cloud. So there's multiple things. But I think what we look at when we do this is, number one, the obvious. Let's take the human factor out of there. I'm not going to dish any system integrators, but first thing you should do when you put a new controller on there is get rid of all the default passwords and change to secured passwords.
And this is all in a commissioning process that you guys are
Yes.
developing.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like
even
a
the guys
pre-functional
now.
test. Okay.
Even the guys now, both on the software and the hardware.
Okay.
Okay, I can't tell you how many times we still see the default passwords in there. I saw Tritium Jaces, the 8000s, and some of the old AX that still had default passwords in there. So you have to get rid of it. It's all about that risk, right, and understanding. So that's the first point of access. Shodan, we've all seen the different ways of pinging out there and hitting devices out there. It knows what to look for. It knows what the profile is of those devices. And if your default password, the hackers nowadays, it's a matter of seconds and they get in there, right? The other thing that we look for is the assets that are on there now, are they brought up to the current security patching? Because I think that's something that's overlooked all the time.
And this is during installation.
During the installation, right? Whether you're putting a new device in, has that been updated to the latest patch? Or if you have existing connected systems, we look at that as well. I mean, that's part of our cyber program that we want to make sure that all the security patching is up to date. So whether it's a Modbus system, SNMP, OPC, it doesn't matter, right? I think that's something where we're on a network now, there's a lot more risk and exposure, and it has to be treated like an IT type of device now. Need to make sure we have that. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of organizations and owners to really grasp, that that's a critical part of what their infrastructure needs to be from a cyber perspective.
So that's from an engineer's perspective, right? So Brian, can you elaborate on that as to how you guys approach commissioning? Because I know you have to have some type of internal commissioning process for you after you finish your deployment, right? So what does commissioning look like for you guys?
You know, for us, the commissioning process is similar to, or it's embedded in the overall project completion, right? So it's going through and making sure the security settings are correct, the username and passwords are correct, any type of encryption that needs to be established is in place. Like Paul said, making sure the controllers one last time are at their current security revision. It doesn't necessarily mean though that we always go and push a software revision. There is a difference there. Because not every software revision that comes out is compatible, much like the APIs and the other things that we mentioned earlier. So you have to be really mindful of the software revision versus the security revision. But there is a checklist that we will go through, and just it's documentation of the IP addresses, it's documentation of the connectivity of the devices back, whether it's device to gateway, gateway to supervisor to cloud engagement, whatever that might be. And then so on and so forth. And then all of that is tracked and then turned over to the client as a completed OEM. So, for us, it's very traditional in how we would complete a normal integration project.
Right. So most of the conversation has been really about deploying technology in the owner's built environment, right? So let's just say now we've got all these IP devices, right? We've got this new technology. The contractors have to be capable of standing up their own IP networks, which eventually turn into OT networks, right? Because of the integration. So for you, Paul, as a designer, what are some of the basic hardware and software requirements that should be embedded just from let's say hardware, from a hardware perspective? What hardware should we look for, or an engineer should look for when he's designing his own standalone OT network?
So I think from OT hardware, we need to make sure it's current operating systems, right? Don't put something that's already legacy that's going to be phased out, because you've already put yourself in a bad position. It could be a Linux operating system, could be a Windows operating system, whatever it may be. Make sure we have a good selection there. I think the second thing is looking at the networking themselves. Really have to look at the type of network gear you're going to install. If you're looking at a network you're going to manage as a MSI system integrator, or is there going to be a third-party managed service provider that's going to do that? You can't put unmanaged switches in. Let's get down to brass tacks.
Thank you.
It's got to be managed. Manage it just like any other IT department would manage it. The only difference is you're the one that takes ownership. And I want to circle back to the other thing. One thing we didn't talk, none of us mentioned, that's really critical that we look at as well, is what ports need to stay open and what ports need to be disabled.
Port security.
Port security. And I know every integrator out here has port 80 open. It may be necessary for setup. Is it necessary to operate the system afterwards? More than likely not. So that should be disabled, because that's just a tunnel for everybody to go into.
So when you're talking about a managed switch solution, you're talking about something that can lock the ports.
Absolutely.
And if the owner decides that they want to use
Right.
multiple port locks, they can use those.
We can lock it in the
Second-
switch.
Okay.
Lock it in the software itself. It should be configurable in the software.
Yeah. So when you're looking at deploying your own OT network, so now we're talking about managed switches at that layer. We're talking about the network media, whether it's fiber, whether it's Cat6. We're
Right.
talking about some type of front-end management switch that can view all of the edge switches, so to speak.
Right, you're
We need routers, we need
Right.
VPN appliances. Mike, talk to me about the importance of a physical firewall and the type of support that you will provide for an integrator who's installing a firewall and making sure that they understand the rules and all that good stuff.
Well, firewall's usually in place for, it basically indicates you're gonna allow some kind of remote access, right? It's something that separates two networks, right? It's typically your OT network and
The cloud.
everything else, the cloud, the building's local, IT network, that kind of stuff. So that firewall will provide that protection and the isolation of that network behind it, and also remote access. So you can implement various VPN technologies between those exterior networks and the OT. You can restrict what they can get to on the inside of that. So if there's only certain, you only want to be able to hit the web supervisor, you only want to be able to hit certain ports. That firewall will be able to do that level of restriction.
Yeah. So Brian, for you guys, because I know you stood up your own OT networks, what type of products do you recommend when it comes to a firewall? Not from a specific vendor, but do you recommend firewalls that are a combination firewall, VPN, cell modem, or do you like to, in your designs, go firewall, VPN, cell modem, all three different pieces of hardware?
You know, for us, I don't know if we've really settled on a consistent approach. We've kind of done a mix of all. And what drives that for us as an integrator is honestly what the specifications come out, right? So a lot of times, right. So a lot of times for us is then we take our team of network architects and we engage the client with the consultant to help identify what is the best path for them. Exactly. We are doing more 4G connectivity to devices. I mean, that's just a given. The industry as a whole has kind of moved in that direction, but there's a real cost to that, and something that we're starting to look into more, right? So, you know, I can't say that there is one path that is leading our effort more than another, but I will say that a lot of it's been a mix of all three configurations, and a lot of that really depends on the client.
Okay. How about you, Paul? What do you guys recommend when it comes to those pieces of hardware being embedded into one firewall, one appliance, or those three functionalities being separate pieces of hardware?
I think it depends, again, if it's a system, an MSI system integrator, we provide requirements. What needs to be locked down, you know, what components are in there. VPNs, that's a huge deal, right? I typically look at the firewall. I'm not crazy about the cell modems.
Right.
We see them a lot, and the reason why I'm not crazy, we've seen this put in by some system integrators from larger companies, and they kept everything open, going back to default passwords and everything, where someone hacked into the cell modem, compromised the network, locked down the server for ransomware. So I think it's the whole total approach, and I think I would never recommend a specific product. You give requirements. This is X, Y, and Z of the requirements. Come to market, let's look at the submittal and say, okay, yes, it's going to check the boxes. We'll approve that and move forward. Okay. But I think a lot of times, most of the people that we work with want to go with a solid, you know, product from like a Cisco, you know, Meraki or something like that, you know.
So let's rewind a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Russ, when you're having because you guys, now that you guys are cloud-based, right? What are the conversations like with the integrators or the engineers? Are you guys even using consulting engineers to put out documents? Because I know you have your smart spec, right? Do you pass that down as an OPR to an engineer to put out a construction documents, right? So to speak, put out construction documents? Or are you having coordination meetings with your integrator and they have your smart spec and that's the route that you guys are taking? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bedrock has, we've got our smart building standard, which does our smart building technology. But over the past 5 years, they've also built a technology team that houses our internal IT teams and network teams. So our network team has put a network standard out there, so we follow that. So it requires the firewalls that we're using, the Meraki switches, everything has to be managed. The way our networks are installed and operated, so that's all in there. The one gap that we had though, so you learn from your experiences, right? And sometimes you just miss things. So we locked everything down, we had everything going our standard, and then there was one miss. And Scott Cochrane here, he knows about this. So we were having our panels, custom built our control panels. We have a standard that we make them, they're cookie cutters. So you can go to any of our properties, you can look at one air handler control panel, or boiler, they're all the same, right? They just have different output boards and input output boards. Where we had a gap in our spec was, we had a switch in there, right? A network switch, and it was a 6-port switch. It was unmanaged, so we have everything locked down. We're passing all of our tests. Our security is flawless, and then I get a call one day like, hey, we've got someone infiltrated the firewall. They're in on IP address whatever it was, 172. So come to find
from one unmanaged switch in the entire network.
No, it's like it was in every panel we have. Right?
So
we're talking thousands of panels. Okay. So we missed this. Okay, so we just put a standard unmanaged switch in there for connectivity to the JSON and other IP devices on our system. And
not to cut you off, Russ. Explain how you think that got missed in the process, because that's one of the things we want to clear up when we talk about cyber harmony is the process, right? So where do you think, not to cast blame on it, but this is all about lessons learned. Where do you think you guys missed that?
My predecessor and I, when we designed the panel, we put the device template out there of the components we wanted, and we just didn't do the due diligence and research on the switch that we spec'd, and it was unmanaged. And the breach came, we had a contractor come in our building, and he was working on systems, and he got into one of our mechanical rooms, and he plugged into our network switch, and next thing you know, we got a rogue player out there in our network just running active live, pulling up, getting into everything we had, and we had to lock it down and escort them on the building, and then we had to pivot and say, whoops, we got to fix this.
That's kind of part of that risk and reward thing that we get too, because it's a convenience thing to put an unmanaged switch in there.
Yes.
You can just plug right in, you can get to what you need to get to, but now you can get to whatever you want to get to.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I just heard, and Paul, I'll let you go ahead. The submittal process should have been a little tighter, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes back to everything in this whole process being important. That's why cyber harmony is important. So that there's a specific process that can be followed, but cyber awareness is part of that process. Not just the piece of hardware, not just the software, but to make sure that the cyber requirements are embedded in that piece of hardware or software. Go ahead, Paul.
So I want to comment to that.
No, please.
A lot of times the submittals are reviewed, it's flagged to remove that switch, and then you go to the job site, and there's that switch when the commissioning agent's looking at it. So
it goes back to the need for a cyber commissioning process.
Process. But I want to touch base too on something. So you both brought up a good point. How do you manage a network when you let anybody plug into it? Can't do that. Those days are over with, right? You're either going to have a dedicated laptop that sits on that network that's that laptop's managed with the security and everything else. The software for configuring and managing all your OT infrastructure needs to be on that device, or VM, virtualized environment if it's a larger client, where they manage that. Because the problem is the risk of anybody. I could have been going to a site, didn't even realize I got something in my spam folder, got malware injected, and now it's injected into somebody's system, anything you connect. The other thing that we didn't talk about is the smarter network switches now. You're starting to get more into the MAC filtering, so if someone plugs something in, it immediately blocks that port, right? If it's not the MAC address assigned to that port. So there are a lot of security things you can do, but nothing's 100%. You're kidding yourself if you think it is, because everybody out there still gets hacked. That is what they want to do. Some of it's monetary, some of it just to be able to do it. Some of it is government related, where they want to impact something to really disrupt what's going on in our country. So it's very interesting. You can never let your guard down, bottom line.
But I think it kind of goes back, and I want to get to you, Mike, here, but I think it goes back to the need for construction. Now, we're talking about the end user or the owner. For construction, facilities, and IT to be on the same page, right? And one of the things that I do, in addition to working for Cochrane Supply and Engineering, I'm the executive director for the Real Estate Cyber Consortium. And one of the initiatives that we're pushing really, really hard is to get the end users to understand that there has to be a marriage between facilities and IT. So we're promoting OT governance teams, right?
Right.
And on those governance teams, there's business professionals, IT professionals, and facilities professionals, whether they're BAS or on the construction side, so that things like that don't happen. Because it's all about the process, managing the process and making sure that those policies, like you talked about some of the policies, and I'll get to you, Mike, and Brian on this. When we're talking about those policies are typically reserved for IT, right? Now our industry is taking this sharp left turn, and now there's all of these OT deployments that some of that policy could apply to, right? Or should apply to. But how does it get in the contractor's hand or the integrator's hand, and how does it get in the engineer's hand? But not only that, how is that process followed all the way through commissioning? And that person on the owner's side has to be from that IT, OT environment, or that OT governance team, right? Because someone has to follow the process all the way through commissioning. Because if you're an end user and you totally rely on the construction documents and the construction professionals, you can have misses like that.
Right.
Yeah,
And
right.
there's usually a champion that steps up to that stuff too.
Absolutely.
And either from one or multiple of these teams, somebody kind of, okay, we're gonna take control of this, we're gonna be the ones responsible for this piece of it, and then start to organize those groups and organize all the people involved to make sure everybody's talking. Here's the things that need to happen.
But it typically comes down to, just like any organization, it comes down to cost, right? Adding people.
Right.
And a lot of organizations don't realize that they need that person until there's a breach, and there's a major issue, right? So when it comes to policies, Brian, when you're talking to the owner, how much do you guys get involved with their cybersecurity policy?
A lot more than we ever used to. I would say that one of the greatest assets or investments that we made years ago was standing up our own team of network architects and just people with a level of understanding greater than a traditional building automation solution to help navigate those conversations with the client teams. Because I was on a call last week with a large financial institution, and their SecOps approval process can take up to 2 years, and that's for any device that's going to sit on their network. Having somebody on staff to navigate those discussions through that duration of time, whatever it may be, is just invaluable. It is the only way that you actually can move things forward if a champion doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or in some cases,
You're your own champion.
Right, right. And in some cases, what we've seen is that the client has multiple champions who are really focused in their own area of growth within the business. And then they unfortunately do not collaborate well. Right. And you're solving the same problem across different champions. And again, having somebody to navigate those waters, it's critical in today's environment.
The glue.
Yes.
Yeah, the glue, and that's what I want to get to, Mike. Talk about, when you look at this graphic, and you and I had a really, really spirited conversation about this, right? We just published an article about the glue. Talk to me a little bit about what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I most certainly shall. When Greg was first talking to me about cyber harmony and he showed me this diagram, I looked at it and I'm like, okay, where do we fit in on this? Because we're a distributor, but we also support everything we sell. So I'm like, we're kind of all the lines in between all these people. We help all these people talk to each other where there's gaps. If there is no champion, who can help step up? And we'll usually try and help those people. We're the glue. We're kind of the ones that say, okay, actually it's the other slide,
this
that's
is
all right.
the
Yeah,
Here, I'm
you know,
gonna
all
go
those
back.
entities that are involved in the building process, that one. You know, whether, you know, we can help make sure that, okay, that end user is aware of all those technologies that are getting deployed on their system and how to best use them and educate them, and sometimes in terms of, okay, what do they need to know to be able to better use the system and to protect it?
And that's from an end user standpoint.
Sure,
supporting the end user.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
now how about supporting the integrator?
Yep, and then the integrator has to deploy this, right? So they've got to protect this, whether it's on the wire or on the endpoints of that wire. You know, secure protocols, things of that nature. You know, Fox S is great. That kind of thing. You know, it's the same level of stuff. It's education. You know, how do you use these new protocols and these new technologies to secure that information, and then how to have them educate their end users as well. So, and being a champion of their own, so that's okay. These are the new processes we have to follow. Get the guy on board that can manage and maintain those processes.
So it sounds like, no, go ahead.
And before I forget too,
No,
it's all relates back to the defense in depth. You know, for everything, for all these projects, that concept kind of expanded just from, okay, here's your IT network. You know, here's all the different things you have to do to protect that, to all these other concepts involved with around the project, including physical security.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, does that contractor have access to the cabinet? Does he have access to the rooms that the cabinet's in? Does he have access to the building? All that kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of roles and responsibilities that go along with that as well.
Right. So it sounds like our industry, we're really behind the 8 ball when it comes to making sure that, for instance, you guys are working on the commissioning process, right? There's a couple firms that we know that are involved with Real Estate Cyber Consortium that are doing the same thing. So my question is, because our industry is really, really tight with the information, right? Everyone gets their information. We've got a lot of smart people in our industry, but we lack collaboration, right? So now, the Building Commissioning Authority, there's a couple of different commissioning entities out there.
Mhm.
How do we run those commissioning processes up the food chain and make sure that that is adopted in an industry-wide commissioning functional test for cyber? Like, how does that happen? Like, I'm meeting with a commissioning agent on Thursday when I get back to talk about it.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the challenges we have to do, because we can talk about data all day, we can talk about security processes all day, protocols, all that good stuff, but I think we lack the fundamental processes in place to make sure we're all on the same page, to make sure we do have cyber harmony. And
Mhm.
you understand his expectations, you understand his expectations,
Mhm.
you follow through on the contract documents all the way through commissioning, and we know how to put out an RFP for cyber commissioning, or it's included in commissioning. How do we run that up the food chain?
Well,
I know that's a tough question.
I think honestly, part of the problem that we see still is the engagement of all the stakeholders are not at the same time. I have projects right now, brand new. I ask, where's the IT folks? They're not here. When are you bringing them into this? Oh, later on in the project. Well, why are you doing that? Because you're gonna need a VM or a server or something for the software. You need the network here. And you need the timing of when those devices need to be powered up, because let's be real here. Most new construction projects, the network switches aren't powered up, the network's not active when you're installing controls, software, and everything. So what happens? Now you have a contractor trying to put a temporary network in to get the stuff going, because the commissioning agent, the mechanical guy, electrical guy needs to do his job because that's what the schedule says. But it doesn't fit in, because the reality is, spinning up your own network and the security hardening on the new network, the things may not operate the same way.
Right, because it's a different network.
So it's a waste of time. So I think overall, you almost need that involvement when it's going to be a project, when they hire an architect.
So let me ask you this, is this a crazy idea? Because I just thought of this while I was standing up here. Are you guys familiar with Six Sigma?
Six Sigma, yeah.
Yeah, it's a process, right?
Yep.
Do we take cyber harmony and make it a process? And as an owner, you pass that down as part of your OPR documents to to make sure that process is followed? Or am I way off base?
It's already sort of that process in a sense.
But is it documented?
It is never documented.
Yes, it has to be documented because it has to become part of someone's contract, right?
Right.
Yeah, or it doesn't get done, or you don't have
It doesn't
handbook
get
as the owner, right?
But a lot of stuff gets VE'd too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You go with the intent of having everything perfect in a perfect world. But then when it comes down to the numbers, this is over budget, this is over budget, especially in the past 2.5 years.
But does it still make sense to pass that process along and you as an owner decide whether it gets VE'd out?
It does, but again, that would be something that would have to be developed and there's cost to that.
Right. Russ?
Yeah, so
That's in your brain turn.
Yeah, well, Paul's brought up two like really great points. So one is that when you're in design phase, we find that a lot of architect companies, engineers, they want to do things in silos. Like they want to have meetings with our network team. They want to have meetings with my team, which is the smart building tech team, controls. They want to have meetings with development. They want to do it all separate, right? And then we sit there as teams and we cross collaborate and we're like, okay, they missed this gap in your network with my BMS system. Right. So then we have to go back. So at Bedrock, what we're doing now is if it's anything to do with technology, if we're going to be on a network, if it's control related or anything, we have all the teams in the same room. All the shareholders are in there with the design firms and we just hashed out there. But the next great point he brought up was value engineering. So we'll come up with a basis of design. This is what we're going to go out on the street with. And then a year later, we're in the process of doing the project, and I'll get a call from a contractor saying, "Hey, we have an issue over here." We start reviewing documents, where someone, it's typically someone on our development team will make a decision to like cut out our managed switches, or they'll cut out something, and then we got to go back and pivot and fix that, make that correction. But those are two very good points. No matter how much you plan for this, there's always bumps in the road that you have to come to an agreement on. And the VE part of the process is that's a big problem for us at Bedrock because they take out the components that we know we need to have. They try to eliminate it because they're trying to save costs on a job.
So I know cyber awareness is pretty much one of the hot topics now. So hopefully we get to a point where end users understand that VE out cyber policies and products and best practices isn't a good idea. So before we wrap up, you guys got any questions?
Yeah. Excuse me. Is there any, you talk a lot about cyber attacks, and Russ, I think, talking about getting breached. What do you see the bad actors out there trying to do in buildings? What's their goal? And what areas may need more protection than other areas? Like hacking in to turn the heat up and make people uncomfortable.
So what they were doing with our breach at Shinola, we actually had the FBI got involved in it. They were trying to lock down our systems and they were going to do ransomware on us. They wanted millions of dollars. So that's what they were trying to do.
Because you guys run a converged network, right?
Correct. Yeah. So thank God the security on the Niagara Jason was very solid, right? Robust, and you picked it up. But yeah, that's what they were doing. They were just trying to come in and it's about disrupting operations, right? So if they can lock down your systems and shut your buildings down, they've got you, right? So then they're asking for millions of dollars. That's what they were trying to do to us. They weren't trying to steal data. They were just trying to shut us down.
So that's the main attacks you see out there today is?
Yeah, so most of when we get the ping, so we get them frequently, like almost daily. They're just pinging ports. They're trying to get in wherever they can. And some of the strategies we put in place, Paul made another good point earlier about that, is changing the default username and password, because you got the trigger default username and password. I've seen so many times in my career where those are left in there. And if you can get into the port, you've got access. You can just blow a station right out of the chase if you want to. You want to be that type of person. So yeah, those are the things that we find. It's more about disrupting our operations to get some kind of financial payout on it.
And I'll tag on to that, into that too, just real brief. But what you mentioned about getting that third party in too to test things as well, it takes you're used to looking at your system, you're used to seeing the things that are there, so you can say, oh yeah, I've locked this down, I've locked that down. Getting somebody else who's not familiar with that system to try and penetrate it and try and figure out the ways that they can get into it
So they're flashing the red light in the bad guys, and they're giving me a ding. We have to wrap this thing up. We could talk about this all day. I'd like to thank my panel, all four of you guys. Thank you very much. Let's give them a